Hello there, welcome to Chris's Weekly History Topics for Week 17, April 21st to the 27th. This week we are going to go over the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt from 1901 to 1908. First, I'm going to go over a little background before he was president. He was the Secretary of the Navy under William McKinley, and during the Spanish-American War, he marched up San Juan Hill in 1898 and won the battle and was a big war hero. And in 1900, the election of 1900, McKinley chose him as his running mate because of being a war hero. What happened shortly after that, though, was in September 1901, William McKinley got assassinated by an anarchist, Leon Czolgosz, and died a few days later. And that really made Theodore Roosevelt become president. A lot of, I would say, Republican bosses, as far as mainstream Republicans in the high up of the party, did not like this. In fact, one Republican said, I knew he shouldn't have picked that ruffian. Now that damn cowboy is president, that just shows how much the Republican establishment didn't like Roosevelt, and they thought that, well, they didn't expect that William McKinley would get assassinated and die, so, they thought, well, McKinley's going to live the next 4 years, and, it won't happen, but then he gets assassinated, and they're like, oh crap, we're stuck with him, basically. Shortly after his assassination, William McKinley dies September 13th, 1901, and then the next day, September 14th, Roosevelt is sworn in as the next president of the United States. There are a few things you should know about Roosevelt. He did what is called Trustbusting, and he basically was the first president to stand up to big business and just be like, hey, you know what, you need to stop this, we need to regulate you a little bit, because this was, he became president at the end of the Gilded Age, and the Gilded Age was when business was booming, when it was all about money, and regulations were non-existent. He basically stood up to big business, and he also stood up to strikes as well. In fact, in Pennsylvania in 1902, there was a coal strike, and he put his foot down basically and sent the military to just basically crush the strike, to show that he means business and it's either his way or the highway, basically. On top of trust busting, he was also a conservationist, mainly like a modern day environmentalist, taking care of the environment, and he, mainly because he was an outdoorsman, he was a hunter, and he started up a lot of national parks in the United States. In fact, the first national parks in the United States were founded by him. One more thing about Roosevelt, even though this isn't in his presidency, in 1908 he chose not to run again, and he chose his Secretary of the Navy, William Howard Taft, as his hand-picked successor, basically. And Taft won the election of 1908, and he wasn't really what Roosevelt was expecting. He was the total opposite of Roosevelt. Didn't want to do anything, just, mainstream Republican, did whatever the party bosses wanted, and Roosevelt didn't like that. What happened 4 years later, in the election of 1912, Roosevelt thought he could secure the nomination to run for a third term, basically. Unfortunately, though, there were too many Republican establishments that didn't like Roosevelt, and he had enemies in the Republican Party, so Taft won the nomination, basically. But this didn't stop him. After Taft's nomination, he and his supporters went over to some lodge and created the Progressive Party. And it got its name known as the Bull Moose Party because one reporter asked him how he felt about the election or something like that. And he said, well, I feel great. I'm as fit as a bull moose. And thus the Bull Moose Progressive Party was born. Now we go to the election of 1912. As you know, if you study history, the Democrats, their nominee was Governor of New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson. And because the Republican Party was split right down the middle, the election was basically handed to Woodrow Wilson. Because, you have Republican versus Democrat. The Democrat's going to win because the Republican Party is split. So, basically, in a way, you can say with the election of 1912, Roosevelt got Wilson elected. Maybe if he chose to go away graciously and let Taft, just run, maybe Taft would have won. Or if, the nomination was different and he actually won the nomination, he might have had another term. So basically, that's the basics of Theodore Roosevelt. I didn't want to put in everything because it would just be too long of a video. So I just wanted to go over the basics of, like his square deal, his trust busting, his time before president, and the election of 1912. Those are basically the basics you'd have to know about Theodore Roosevelt. So that's it for this week, and I will see you next week.